What if I told you that Batman is actually the greatest example of how not to deal with trauma? That behind the mask lies a wounded child who refuses to grow up? I've spent years studying psychology, analyzing fictional characters as windows into the human psyche. And no character has disturbed me more than Bruce Wayne. Not because he's evil, but because he's so believable, so relatable, so dangerously seductive in his dysfunction. Today we're going to dissect The Dark Knight through the lens of Jungian psychology. We're going to explore how Bruce Wayne became trapped in what Carl Jung called the orphan archetype, and why this makes him one of fiction's most tragic figures. But more importantly, we're going to understand why millions of us secretly admire his refusal to heal. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: Batman doesn't overcome trauma. He weaponizes it. He doesn't heal from his wounds. He builds his entire identity around keeping them fresh and bleeding. And that should terrify us. Let me take you back to that night in Crime Alley. 8-year-old Bruce Wayne watches his parents die. In that moment, something breaks inside him that will never be repaired. Not because it can't be, but because he won't allow it to be. In Jungian psychology, the orphan archetype represents the wounded child within us all. It's the part that feels abandoned, vulnerable, and desperate for safety. Most people who experience the orphan wound eventually move through it. They grieve. They process. They integrate the experience and grow beyond it. But Bruce Wayne? He made a different choice. He decided that night that Bruce Wayne, the innocent child, had died with his parents. And in his place he would create something else entirely. Watch how he tells his origin story across different movies and comics. He doesn't say, "My parents were murdered and I survived." He says, "I died that night too." This isn't poetic license. This is psychological truth. Bruce Wayne committed psychological suicide at age 8 and spent the rest of his life as a ghost, haunting his own existence. This is what Jung called identification with the complex. Instead of having an orphan wound that he could heal from, Bruce became the orphan wound. The trauma didn't happen to him, it became him. Think about what this means practically. A healthy person processes trauma by feeling the pain, grieving the loss, and eventually integrating the experience into a fuller sense of self. They don't forget what happened, but they're not defined by it. They grow around it like a tree growing around an old wound in its bark. Bruce Wayne chose the opposite path. He decided that the wound was all there was. That without the pain, there would be nothing left of him worth preserving. This is why, in 70 years of comics and movies, Bruce Wayne has never actually healed. He's never moved past that 8-year-old boy screaming in the alley. Because moving past it would mean admitting that there might be something beyond the trauma. Something worth becoming that isn't built on his parents' graves. And that possibility terrifies him more than any villain ever could. Now here's where Batman's psychology becomes truly insidious. The cape and cowl aren't just a disguise, they're a psychological prison that ensures Bruce Wayne can never grow up. Carl Jung wrote extensively about personas, the masks we wear to interact with the world. A healthy persona is flexible. It serves us when we need it, but we can take it off. We can be different things in different contexts. The businessman at work, the father at home, the friend at play. Bruce Wayne created the ultimate persona in Batman. But here's the trap: he can never take it off. Because Batman isn't just what he does. Batman is who he is when he's most himself. Watch Bruce Wayne in social situations across different media. He's hollow, fake, going through the motions of being a playboy billionaire while counting the minutes until he can return to the cave. Because Bruce Wayne the person stopped developing at age 8. All his growth, all his passion, all his authentic self got poured into Batman. This is fundamentally different from other orphaned heroes. Let's compare him to Superman, another orphan who lost his parents. Clark Kent doesn't become Superman because he's wounded, he becomes Superman because he's whole. He had loving adoptive parents who helped him process his loss and develop a healthy sense of self. Superman is what Clark chooses to do with his gifts. Batman is what Bruce uses to avoid dealing with his pain. Or look at Spider-Man. Peter Parker loses Uncle Ben, feels crushing guilt, and becomes Spider-Man partly out of that guilt. But Peter continues to grow. He has relationships, struggles with normal problems, develops as a person. Spider-Man serves Peter Parker's growth. Batman prevents Bruce Wayne's growth. The mask became a way to freeze himself in that moment of maximum pain. As long as he's Batman, he never has to face the terrifying question, who would I be if I wasn't defined by what happened to me? This is why Bruce Wayne appears so shallow and empty when he's not in the costume. It's not an act, it's the truth. He genuinely doesn't know who he is when he's not being Batman. He poured all of his personality development, all of his authentic self, into a trauma response. And the more time passes, the more impossible it becomes to change. Because now he's not just avoiding his grief, he's avoiding 40 years of missed emotional development. But here's the most disturbing aspect of Batman's psychology. He's not actually trying to eliminate crime in Gotham. He's trying to manage it, to control it, to ensure there's always just enough to justify his existence. Jung wrote about what he called autonomous complexes, parts of our psyche that seem to operate independently of our conscious will. They have their own agenda, their own needs, and they'll manipulate our conscious mind to get what they want. Batman started as Bruce Wayne's attempt to process trauma through action. But over time, the Batman complex became autonomous. It developed its own needs, its own hungers. And its primary need is the existence of criminals to fight. Think about this logically. Bruce Wayne has virtually unlimited resources. He's a genius-level intellect with access to advanced technology and global connections. If he actually wanted to eliminate crime in Gotham, he could do it. Invest in education, social programs, economic development. Use his influence to address root causes. Instead, he puts on a costume and punches people one at a time. For decades. This isn't stupidity. This is psychological necessity. Because the moment Gotham becomes truly safe, Bruce Wayne has to face the question he's been running from his entire life. Now what? Watch how he reacts whenever crime rates actually drop in various stories. He becomes restless, agitated, almost depressed. He starts looking for threats that might not exist. Because safety means he might have to stop being Batman. And stopping being Batman means facing Bruce Wayne. This is why his rogues gallery is so psychologically revealing. The Joker, Two-Face, the Penguin, they're not just criminals. They're aspects of Bruce's own psyche projected outward. The Joker represents chaos and madness. The complete breakdown Bruce fears will happen if he stops controlling everything through violence. Two-Face represents the duality Bruce refuses to integrate, the wounded child and the avenging adult. The Penguin represents the grotesque thing Bruce fears he's become, a creature shaped entirely by childhood trauma. He keeps fighting these enemies, but he never actually defeats them. They always escape, always return. Because defeating them permanently would mean integrating these aspects of himself, and integration would require growth beyond the trauma. So he maintains them, manages them, ensures they're always dangerous enough to justify Batman's existence, but never quite dangerous enough to actually threaten Gotham's stability. It's a perfect system. And it's completely insane. The most heartbreaking aspects of Batman's story are the moments when he almost breaks free from the cycle. When healing seems possible. When growth appears within reach. In Batman Begins, we see young Bruce Wayne traveling the world, trying to understand fear and justice. For a brief moment, it seems like he might find a healthy way to process his trauma. He's learning, growing, developing a philosophy. Then Ra's al Ghul offers him a shortcut: become fear incarnate, wage war on crime through terror. Bruce rejects Ra's methods, but he doesn't reject the underlying premise. He still chooses to become a symbol of fear rather than a symbol of hope. He's so close to a breakthrough, he could have become a philanthropist, a reformer, a healer. Instead, he chooses to become a weapon. The Dark Knight Rises gives us an even more painful example. 8 years after Harvey Dent's death, Bruce Wayne has retired as Batman. Gotham is peaceful. Crime is down. Bruce should be happy, fulfilled, ready to move on with his life. Instead, he's a broken recluse, limping around Wayne Manor like a ghost. Because without Batman, he doesn't know how to exist. The movie literally shows us what happens when Bruce Wayne tries to stop being defined by trauma. He becomes a hollow shell. When Bane arrives and threatens Gotham, Bruce is almost grateful. Finally, a reason to be Batman again. A justification for returning to the cycle. The movie teases us with the possibility of real change. Alfred begs Bruce to move on, to find happiness beyond the cowl. Selina Kyle represents the possibility of a genuine romantic connection, not based on shared trauma like his relationships with other vigilantes, but based on mutual attraction and compatibility. For a moment, it seems like Bruce might choose healing over vengeance, life over death, growth over stagnation. But then he puts the mask back on. The ending of The Dark Knight Rises pretends that Bruce finds peace, that he moves to Florence with Selina and lives happily ever after. But this feels hollow because we've seen what Bruce Wayne is like when he's not Batman. He's empty, disconnected, going through the motions of life without actually living. The real tragedy isn't that Bruce becomes Batman. It's that after 30 years of being Batman, he's forgotten how to be anything else. Here's the uncomfortable truth about Batman that no one wants to acknowledge. He's not actually a positive role model. He's a cautionary tale that we've chosen to celebrate. Jung wrote about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress or deny. On a collective level, Batman represents our cultural shadow. He embodies our secret belief that growth is impossible, that wounds define us, that the only meaningful response to pain is more pain. Batman teaches us that trauma gives us purpose, that healing is weakness, that true strength comes from nursing our wounds and using them as weapons against the world. Look at how Batman is marketed and consumed. He's the dark hero, the realistic one, the one who deals with real problems through necessary violence. He's contrasted with heroes like Superman, who are dismissed as naive or unrealistic for believing in hope and redemption. But which worldview actually serves us better? The belief that people can grow, change, and heal? Or the belief that we're forever defined by our worst moments? Batman's popularity reveals something disturbing about our culture. We're more comfortable with eternal vengeance than with the possibility of forgiveness. We're more attracted to sophisticated damage than to simple healing. This is why Batman stories keep getting darker and more violent over time. Because the character's core premise, that trauma should never be processed, only weaponized, naturally leads to escalation. More violence, more darkness, more pain. Because healing would end the story and we don't want the story to end. Batman has become our culture's favorite lie about trauma. That it makes us stronger, that it gives us purpose, that without our wounds we would be nothing special. But trauma doesn't make us stronger. Healing from trauma makes us stronger. Trauma doesn't give us purpose. Choosing to grow beyond trauma gives us purpose. The real Bruce Wayne died that night in Crime Alley not because of what Joe Chill did to him, but because of what he chose to do to himself afterward. He chose to stop growing, stop changing, stop becoming. He chose to remain 8 years old forever, crying in an alley, surrounded by blood and pearls. And we celebrate this choice. We call it heroic. We write songs about it, make movies about it, dress our children up as this wounded child who refused to heal. Batman isn't a superhero. He's a super victim. And his greatest crime isn't anything he does to criminals in Gotham's alleys. His greatest crime is teaching us that victims should stay victims. That wounds should stay open. That the proper response to trauma is to ensure it never ends. The tragedy of Batman isn't that his parents died. The tragedy is that he never let them rest in peace. He kept them alive in his pain, made them prisoners of his refusal to heal, forced them to watch their son destroy himself one night at a time in service to their memory. They died so that he might live. Instead, he chose to die so that their death might have meaning. And in making that choice, he became the very thing that destroyed them, a force that takes children's parents away from them, leaving behind only fear and darkness and the promise that the cycle will never end. The boy in the alley is still there, still crying, still 8 years old, still waiting for someone to tell him it's okay to stop hurting. But Batman will never let that happen. Because Batman's greatest fear isn't the Joker or Ra's al Ghul or even death itself. Batman's greatest fear is healing. And until he faces that fear, the child in Crime Alley will remain trapped forever, surrounded by shadows of his own making, convinced that his pain is the only thing that makes him special. The cape and cowl aren't symbols of justice. They're a mausoleum where Bruce Wayne buried his own childhood, and where he visits every night to make sure it stays dead. And we call this heroism.